Here's how I transformed this simple boring scene into something amazing like this. So Punisher, no not this one, this guy from the Corridor crew held a challenge on 4th of February where you have to create something cool from this base template scene. The rules are very strict and if you miss any of them, you're out. So am I going to make it into the top 100? Stick around to find out. The first step of creation is the idea. I did not rush to start the project and allowed my mind to come up with as many ideas as I could. Once I had a few ideas, I decided to pick one of them and started working on that. So my idea was to create a Batmobile that is being chased by cops, then it transformed itself into a bike to go through under a truck to get away from the cops. I spent around 20 hours creating the Batmobile and the Batpod from scratch and it turned out amazing. Wow. But then another idea just hit me. So the idea was of a paperboat that a kid was playing with in a puddle. At this moment I was really confused about which one of these two ideas I should work on. So I flipped a coin. And guess what? What? No, you have to guess. It was the paperboat. Now that we have our idea, we need some reference images to work with. I use PureWeb, which is an amazing free software where you can place multiple images at one place while you're working. The paperboat was really simple to model. I just used a plane to model it, then I used a bevel modifier to bevel out the edges, a subdivision surface modifier to give it more subdivisions and make it smooth, a displacement modifier after that so that the paperboat is not very uniform and has some randomness.
It's organic, man!
At the end, I also have added a solidify modifier with a really low amount of thickness, cause papers do have some amount of thickness, right? Now I wanted to put the paperboat into the template file, but the thing is that our vehicle is pretty big, around 3 meters high, but our paperboat is really small, around 6 centimeters tall. I could just scale the paperboat up so it's about the height of the vehicle, but there's a problem with it. Let me explain. Have a look at this image and think about what is the main reason this scene looks like a miniature. If you said shallow depth of field, then you're right. For those of you who don't know, shallow depth of field refers to when only a small portion of the image is in focus due to being shot with a smaller aperture. The smaller the object, the shallower the depth of field will be. And it makes everything look like miniature. Now in Blender, the depth of field works correctly when objects are built to real-world scale.
When people say, why do you talk about modeling things in real-world scale? This is why.
It's not only about depth of field. When you keep the objects to real-world scale, the whole composition of the scene feels a lot more believable. So at frame number 1, I added an empty at the place of the car controller, then parented the car controller and the camera to that empty that I just added. I then scaled down the empty to scale everything down with it. I also have a human model in the background to get a sense of scale. Don't ask me why I have that box on him. But there's a problem. Our car is super fast and there's no way our paperboat can go that fast. So I followed along this video on how to change the speed of the car. But you might be thinking that I'm modifying the scale, the speed of the vehicle and all that. Will it be even accepted? The answer is...
I don't know.
Take a chance and risk it all, or play it safe and suffer defeat.
Next, I imported the paperboat into the template file and parented it to the car controller. Then to enable depth of field is as easy as selecting the camera, then enabling depth of field in the camera properties. You can also select an object for the camera to focus on. For now, I've just selected our paperboat as the focus object, but for the final render, I added an empty and used that for the focus object. That way we can easily control the focus distance and also animate the focus. The smaller the f-stop, the less objects will be in focus. The higher the f-stop, the more objects will be in focus. It can be difficult when objects are moving so fast that they are getting out of the viewport frame. So what you can do is you can open up the properties panel by hitting N, then in the view log select the object that you want to focus on. And voila! I added a plane and made the material water by making the material shiny and setting the transmission value to 1. It's very simple right now, but that's about to change in the near future. I played around the lighting a bit, which also got changed totally in the final render. I'll break down how I achieved the final lighting later in this video. I deleted the default ground plane cause it was very large, added
another one,
and applied a free Pebble material from ambientcg.com using micro polygon displacement. I wanted the camera to be partially in the water, but our camera just clips through the water and doesn't create that camera in the water effect. But before I did that, I selected a few vertices of the plane and using proportional editing, I moved those parts up so that the terrain has a little bit of variation. To get the camera in the water effect, I added a cube at the place of the camera. Then if you enable the copy attributes add-on, you can shift select an object and press Ctrl C to copy its attributes, like rotation in this case. I also parented the cube to the camera. Then the real trick is to use this cube as a boolean to cut through the water. But our plane is hollow, that is because our plane doesn't have any thickness. So we can select all the vertices and press E to extrude. All the normals are flipped, so we can press Shift and to recalculate the normals. To get the water caustics on the paperboat, I used a spotlight with a procedural Voronoi texture and animated the seed value. There's already a great video on this by Polyfion. Then I placed it so that it casts light on the paperboat. I forgot to parent it to the paperboat, but I did that later. I needed a kid model, so I used this free one from Reallusion. To import it into Blender, you can simply use their CC3 Blender Tools add-on. One of its great features is you can turn the rig into a Rigify rig with just a click. But there's a problem when I'm animating the kid. I can't make the hand reach the paperboat without stretching it. So I duplicated the character and used this one to animate the hand. And yeah, it does look damn horrific. I deleted everything except the hand.
FBI, open up!
The animation right now is very rough, but I'll polish it later. I'm not a really good animator, but using a video as a reference for animating does help a lot. At a certain point, I wanted the character to let go of the paperboat. I tried a lot of different ways for doing this and I failed a lot of times. No matter how many times I failed, I got back up. I found an amazing free add-on called Dynamic Parent, which allows you to animate parenting in Blender. First, I'm gonna select my paperboat, press Alt P and clear the parenting so that the paperboat is not already a child of any object. Then to use the Dynamic Parent add-on, what you have to do is select the object that you want to be the parent first. In my case, it is the rig, so I'm gonna select that and I'm gonna go to pose mode and select the hand bone. Then I'm gonna go out of pose mode and shift select the paperboat. Then open up the sidebar by hitting N and in the Dynamic Parent section, click on Create. I want the paperboat to stop following the hand at frame number 19 and follow a path instead. Like kids at the age of 19, stop following their parents and follow their own path. So with the paperboat selected at frame number 19, I'm gonna press Shift S and choose cursor to select it. Then I'm gonna add a curve path. I'm gonna go to edit mode, deselect the first vertex of the path, then select it again so that's the active one. Change the pivot point to active element, then press Shift S and choose selection to cursor, keep offset, so that the starting point of the path is exactly located at the origin point of our paperboat. Then I'm gonna add an empty at the same place, add a follow path constraint to it and choose our newly created path. And our empty goes missing. That's because for the follow path constraint to work correctly, the object has to be right in the center of the world. So we can press Alt G to move it to the center of the world. Then we can enable fixed position and animate our empty along the path. Change the interpolation mode of the animation to linear by hitting T so that the speed of the animation is same all the time. Then at frame number 19, select the empty first, then the paperboat, then click on Create in the Dynamic Parent section. Woohoo! At the moment, the paperboat's movement is very uniform and not very natural. So in the graph editor, I tweak the animation so that it looks better. I also added a noise modifier to the Z Euler rotation of the paperboat. I copied and pasted that modifier to the X and Y axes, changed the phase so that each one has a different seed. Now our paperboat's movement is not very smooth and steady, but it has some shake to it. I wanted the character to throw a small pebble in the water to speed up the boat. So I created a small pebble and parented that to the left hand of the character using the Dynamic Parent add-on. To make the character throw the stone, I disabled the parenting at a certain frame. Right now it just stops in the air, so to make it continue the motion, I had to calculate the trajectory by finding out the mass of the pebble and then the motion of the hand and its acceleration, dividing by the number of the derivatives you deleted. I'm just kidding. I just added an active rigid body physics to the pebble. I selected the ground plane and assigned a passive rigid body physics to it so that the pebble collides with the ground. When we play the animation, the pebble just pops out and it just stays there.
I am not moving an inch.
Setting the ground plane's collision shape to mesh and decreasing the margin in the sensitivity fixed the popping out effect for me. But still our pebble doesn't move anywhere. That's because when animated is ticked off, the rigid body is active. When animated is ticked on, the object's animation is active. So we can actually animate this value. But the pebble doesn't go far enough. So I added a wind force field and played around with its direction and the strength until I got the desired outcome.
The power of the force.
A few moments later.
Then I used complicated math and formulas to simulate the water and it turned out crap. Man, the flow just hates me.
Very sad. Anyway.
Then I turned to the ocean modifier to create the puddles. The size is pretty big right now, so I'm gonna bring it down and it turns into complete garbage. So in the waves, bring down the scale to create a shallow water. The time value controls the speed of the waves, so we can animate it by typing hash frame. You can divide hash frame by a larger value to slow down the speed of the waves. Then I used the cube as a boolean to cut through the water, as I talked about earlier in the video. But the plane is hollow because it doesn't have any thickness, so we can add a solidify modifier before the boolean modifier. I also animated the position of the water plane to mimic the flowing of water effect. Right now our paperboat is not moving up and down with the water, so I followed along this video of Pixel 3D. To create the water splash caused by the pebble, I added a cube at the place of the pebble, and I followed this great video by Crossmind Studio that shows how to simulate a crown splash simulation. And honestly, it turned out too good to be true for me. I duplicated the hand once more and animated the taking out of the boat. I also added some grass in the background. Here I'm playing with the lighting and the materials, just trying out stuff and seeing what works and what doesn't. For all of these HDRIs, I'm using the Polyhaven asset browser. Polyhaven is an amazing website which provides thousands of 3D models, textures and HDRIs absolutely for free. The Polyhaven asset browser is an add-on which brings all of the assets right into Blender, which you can drag and drop from the asset browser. By getting the add-on, you'll also be getting early access to upcoming assets. At this point, the background was looking really empty, so I added some rocks, and to make them wet at the bottom, I vortex painted a color attribute and used that to mix between two different roughness values and to also make the color darker at the bottom. I'm also mixing a mossy material with the rock material using the geometry pointiness value being inverted using a color ramp so that the moss only appears in the flat areas. I wanted to add some touch to the paperboat and not just a simple paperboat. So I modeled a simple clover and I placed that in the paperboat. Added some more fold gauge and some background elements to fill up the background. I also updated the Paperboat material and it looks a lot better now. It does look a little bit complicated, but don't worry, I got your back. So let's start with the base color. To create this, I'm using this black and white image texture, which is actually a photograph that I took of my test paper back from my school. I'm using it to mix between two different colors. Then I have another texture which I texture painted using stencils. Then I'm using this one to blend a blue color. I have a hue saturation value node to tweak the colors a bit. Then I have this brown noise texture which I'm mixing with the base color using this black and white noise texture as the factor. It makes the paperboat look old and dirty. Then I have this gradient texture and I'm mixing it with this noise texture with the method set to color burn. You can clearly see what effect it does. I'm using this gradient texture as the factor for this hue saturation value node, which makes the paperboat darkened and desaturated at the bottom, because this is the bottom part that touches the water. So that's the base color. Now let's talk about the roughness. For the roughness, I'm using this roughness map of a paper material from ambientcg.com. For those of you who don't know how roughness maps work, black color represents a value of 0, which if you use for roughness will make the material shiny. White color represents a value of 1, which will make the material rough and dull. But the texture is very flat and subtle, so I used a color ramp to tweak the colors a bit. Then I duplicated the color ramp and made this one a lot darker. Then I'm mixing the two different roughness maps using the gradient map as the factor so that the bottom of the paperboat will be wet. After that, I have this mix node whose factor is this texture, which you can't really see yet because I've animated its appearance. I'll tell you why in just a moment. I used a Voronoi texture to create small water droplets. Then I'm using this as the factor to make those parts black in the roughness map. The reason I've animated its visibility is because those water droplets appear when the water splashes. I've also used the same texture for the hue saturation value node to make the base color darker as those dots, because when there's water on a surface, the surface appears to be darker. As you can see that these look like small water droplets. And when combined with the real geometry nodes scattered water droplets, it looks even better. So that's the roughness. Now let's have a look at the normal map. For those of you who don't know what is a normal map is a special type of texture that fixes details without actually displacing the geometry. So this is what it looks like to be known as that. So this is what it looks like with the normal map, and this is what it looks like without the normal map. I'm gonna turn down the strength of all of these so that I can show you what each one does. First up, I have this normal map of the same paper material from ambientcg.com, and this alone makes the material look a lot like paper. Then this normal map goes into the normal socket of this bump node, which is using the water droplets texture as the height. After that, this bump node goes into another bump node, and this one's using our original base color as the height. At the end, I have this translucent BSDF being mixed with the principal BSDF, and the difference it makes is just day and night. To control the strength of the translucency, you can add a hue saturation value node after the base color and use the value slider. So this is what the final shader looks like, and if you'd like to take some screenshots,
you can thank me later.
Next, I created a few water droplets and distributed them on the Paperboat using geometry nodes. I also want to add some water drops effect on the camera when the water splashes. I tried a few different methods for doing this, but I'm going to show you the one that worked the best. I downloaded this image of water drops from unsplash.com, removed the parts where there are no drops using Affinity Photo. You can use any photo editor you want, it's just a simple editing task. Then using the import images as planes add-on, you can import the image as a plane right into Blender. Then using the copy attributes add-on, you can shift select the camera and copy its location and rotation. You can press G then Z double times to move it on the local Z axis. For the material, first off I have a glass shader, then a transparent BSDF being mixed with the alpha as the factor. Then I have another transparent BSDF with the mix shader, and I have animated the factor to make the water drops appear when the water splashes. Here's how I created the final water material. First I have a glass shader with a noise texture as the bump to create some water ripples. Before I go into explaining all the nodes further, let me show you how I created the Caustics effects using a different scene setup. Now, I'm not the original author of this technique. Here's the video of the original creator showing this technique. I'm just using the concept from that video to build upon my shader. Here's how to do it. First, you have a glass shader, then you have a transparent shader, and you mix those together using the is shadow ray from the light path node as the factor. What this does is it makes the shadows to be transparent, because we are using a transparent BSDF. Now if we multiply the shadow ray by a Caustics texture using the one that Polyfior showed us in his video, we get this amazing Caustics effect. But the effect is very subtle, so here's the trick. In the transparent BSDF, this value goes from a value of 0 to 1, but we can trick Blender and type a value which is beyond 1. Now the effect is much more prominent. And if you set the overnight texture to 4D, you can use this W value to change the scene. You can type #frame to animate the pattern. I have this math divide node to slow down the speed of the animation. Now let's get back to our original water shader. After the glass shader, why do I have 3 of these transparent shaders? If you look at this color, you might think this is white. But when you look at the RGB values, you can see that the green and blue values are 1, while the red value is set to 2. And if we preview this, the Caustics is bright red. In the second one, the green value is set to 2, and in the third one, the blue value is set to 2. Now if we combine all 3 of these, we get this what? We get this white color. That is because red, green and blue combine together to form white.
Hey, what's the point of all this?
Well, for the factor of these mixed nodes, I've duplicated the Caustics pattern 3 times. So for the green channel, I can offset the Caustics pattern ever so slightly. Now you can see the red and green colors separated in the Caustics. We can do the same thing for the blue value but in the negative direction. Now we have dispersion effect. But this is totally not the right way of doing this. But if it works, it works. After that, I have this duckweed shader, algae, moss or whatever you like to call it, using some procedural worn eye textures, and I'm using this black and white texture to mix it with the water material. Then I have this principal volume shader for the volume output. You can't really tell the difference, but when I increase the strength, you can see that the water glows, because I'm using this for the emission strength, and I've set the density to 0. So this is the final water material. If you'd like to take some screenshots, feel free to. To add some even more details to the scene, I added drawn paper boats indicating that the kid has already been playing for some time, some old and dirty water bottles, leaves floating on the water, and I even animated this ladybug on the clover which flies away when the pebble impacts the water. Here's how I achieved the final lighting, but there's nothing. That's because I've turned off all of the lights so that I can show you what each one does on its own. First off, I have this spotlight which is casting Caustics on this paper boat. I've talked about this earlier in the video. Then I've duplicated the spotlight and moved it over to the board. After that, I've also added this spotlight to light up this part of the paper boat to separate it from the background. And I've also parented these two spotlights to the paper boat. So these were all of the lamps. Now let's have a look at the environment lighting. In the viewport shading, I'm going to turn off the scene lights so that I can show you what the environment lighting does on its own. For the world lighting, I'm just using an HDRI to light up the scene. I really like the lighting of this HDRI, but I don't like the background at all. So what I did is I added another HDRI and mixed these together using the Is Camera Ray from the Light Path node. What it does is it uses the first HDRI to light up the scene and the second one for the background. So if I were to remove the second background node, the objects are lit up but the background is completely black. If you want to learn more about lighting, then I have a full video on that which you can watch after watching this video. To improve the lighting, I've also added this plane which looks like a mess, but it's using this noise texture as the transparency, and it blocks some of the light and allows some of the light to pass through, creating this really interesting looking pattern which adds a lot of depth and details to the scene. And this object is used a lot in photography and is called a gobo. But we don't want this plane to be visible in the camera, but it still casts shadows on the objects. So in the object data properties, we can disable the ray visibility for the camera. Or what you can also do is in the material, you can add a transparent BSDF and mix it using the Is Camera Ray as the factor. Wait, what? This is not working? Oh, it's having the opposite effect. So we just need to invert the connection. So this is just the environment lighting. If we mix it with the scene lights, this is what it looks like. I've also added some fog to the scene using just a cube using the principal volume shader. You can see it much more clearly if I increase the strength. So after about 40 hours of hard work, excluding those 20 hours I spent modeling the Batmobile and the Batpod, 9 hours of Blender rendering the animation, I did some post-processing and color grading in DaVinci Resolve, added sound effects, and after all that, here is the final animation. So did I make it into the top 100? You have 3 seconds to guess. 3, 2, 1. No, I didn't. But that doesn't mean that I failed. I didn't even participate for the intent of winning in the first place.
It's not about winning, it's about fun.
As long as you tried your best, that's all what matters.
A real loser is somebody that's so afraid of not winning, they don't even try.
The prize is the knowledge and experience you get. At least it doesn't hurt as much while saying it. Now you know how I created this complex animation, but things can slow down by a lot when creating scenes like this. Fortunately, there's an easy fix for this which you can learn by watching this video. If you enjoyed or found this video helpful, then give it a thumbs up. If you made this far to the end of the video, then let me know by commenting I deleted the default cube, and smash that subscribe button if you want more videos and tutorials like this. I'll be back.